At some point, most bass players feel stuck, like they're practicing but not really getting anywhere, they're sick of watching loads of free YouTube videos because they don't help, and they want to know that the things they're actually practicing are the things that will actually make them better. Over the last 16 years, I've taught over 500 bass players in music schools, in private lessons and online, and in that time, I've noticed something really powerful. The students that made real progress and transformed themselves into really creative, confident bass players that sounded great all had 9 habits in common. So in this video, I'm going to show you what these 9 habits are. I'm going to show you how each one will drastically improve your playing, and I'll show you how to apply all of them, no matter your age, experience, or how long you've been playing. And if you are sick of trying to learn bass through free YouTube videos and you just want to focus on the stuff that will really make a difference, check out the links in the description below. So let's start with the first habit, which is really important for building your feel, your musical vocabulary, and your ability to play in bands. So when I taught at a music school in London, I'd walk around the building and constantly I'd see students walking around with headphones on. Now, to the untrained eye, it looked like these students were just zoning out the whole time, but in reality, they were actually doing something that was crucial and beneficial for their progress. They were doing active listening. If you're not familiar with the term, active listening is when you listen to a piece of music not for your own enjoyment, but to analyze it and to try and learn from it. You're listening to it and trying to dissect why the bassist and the drummer on the song work so well together, what the notes are in a certain riff, or why a particular chord progression sounds so good. And every moment that these students and you actively listen to a piece of music, you're sharpening your musical instincts. Now, you might be thinking, I don't have a good enough ear to do that. But the truth is, no one starts with a good ear. Active listening isn't about talent, it's about focus. So if you feel a bit stuck with your practice and you're looking for something to add that will really make a difference, try active listening. By far, it's the quickest and easiest way to improve as a bass player. And when you're ready to start using what you hear, that's when you can move on to the second habit. One of the most powerful practice habits you can use to transform your playing as a bass player is transcribing. Now, if you're not familiar with what transcribing is, all it means is that you listen to a piece of music like a bass line, a riff, or a melody, you work out how to play it by ear, and then once you've done that, you write it down. Now, this might sound intimidating at first, but trust me, as someone who's done loads of transcriptions and started from absolute zero, you don't need pro-level skills to be able to do this. So, why does it work so well? Well, what transcribing does is it forces you to connect the sounds that you hear either in your head or through your ears with where they are located on an instrument, and then it helps you understand what's actually happening when you apply those sounds, those bits of theory, or understand what's happening in a piece of music. Back when I taught at the music school in a performance class, I could always tell the bass players that had done transcribing because they played with a lot more creativity, a lot more control, and they just had a lot more confidence. So if it worked for them, it will definitely work for you, and it doesn't have to take long. Even transcribing 1 bar a day or 5 minutes a day will make you grow much further and much faster than doing hours of mechanical exercises. So what's habit number 3? Well, we all love the idea of the self-taught musician, someone who manages to figure everything out through raw talent, grit, and persistence. But the truth is that most self-taught players end up with massive gaps in their playing. Now, this isn't necessarily their fault, and if you've been doing the same thing, it's not your fault as well. But this is what a lot of bass players do, and it's no wonder that they feel stuck, they feel frustrated, and they haven't got a clear idea of what they need to do to improve. So if you want to progress, instead of teaching yourself, what should you do? Well, a few years ago, I taught a masterclass at the University of Winchester here in the UK, and during the session, the students would not stop asking questions. Now, it wasn't because they didn't know anything, but rather because they knew the value of having a guide, of being able to get information from someone who knew more than they did. Having a guide or having a teacher you can learn from doesn't just mean that they give you information that you don't know. A teacher will provide structure, a teacher will provide feedback on the unique things that you find difficult. The best players I ever taught weren't the ones that tried to teach themselves. They got teachers that they could ask for help, that would lay out a path that they could follow. And if you feel you need some structure and some guidance to help you do the things that will actually make a difference, check out the links in the description below. But there was also one other crucial factor that was accelerating these students' progress, and it's probably the single most important thing that you can have when it comes to developing as a bass player. No matter what level I've taught at, whether that's complete beginners or really advanced bass players, even pros, There's one ingredient that massively accelerates progress on the bass, and that is getting real feedback on your playing. Why is feedback so valuable? Because it does two things that nothing else can. First, it's specific to you. Think about it. At home, you might be practicing all the right things, but if your technique's a little bit off or your timing's slipping without you realizing it, you might not notice, so you could be stuck for months before you realize you're doing anything wrong. But if you get feedback, it will highlight these problems, show you exactly what to fix, and you can start making progress much sooner. And second, feedback is a shortcut to real growth. When you learn from someone who's further down the road from you, so someone who's made all the mistakes or who's mastered all the techniques, done all the gigs, you tap into their hard-won knowledge. So things that might have taken them 20 years to figure out, you can start using within a couple of months. And having these shortcuts to knowledge doesn't just make you a better player, it makes you a more confident one too. Because when you've got feedback from someone you trust, you're no longer wondering, oh, is my technique right anymore, for example. You actually know that you're on the right track. The only question now is, how do you know what to get feedback on? Well, before you can fix anything and before you know what you should actually practice, you've got to get clarity on the things you're doing wrong. That's why one of the first things that all my best students do is we go through what's called a skills audit together. In private lessons, this is where the two of us will sit down together and we'll talk about their goals, their ambitions. I might watch them play a little bit too. Then together we figure out where they're really strong as a bass player, but also where they're struggling. Sometimes it's bad technique, sometimes it's slightly weak timing or a bit of confusion about how to apply music theory. But the goal of the skills audit is always the same, to eliminate the guesswork around what they actually need to do. And once we've done this together, they're no longer wondering if they're doing the right exercises or practicing in the right way. So once a skills audit shows you what to focus on, the next question is, how do you actually practice that in a way that makes you get better? This is where a practice audit comes in. So one of my best ever students, we'll call them F in this video, was absolutely obsessed with this concept. I taught F for about 2 years, both privately and in music school, and around about every 6 months or so, we'd sit down together and review his practice habits. So not just what he was working on, but how he was working on it. If something wasn't working, we would drop it from his practice routine. But if something was working really well, we'd lean into that much more. But what made all the difference to his progress wasn't the fact that he was talented, it's that he constantly checked in with how he was learning. So the next time you practice, instead of just going through the motions, ask yourself, is this exercise, for example, actually improving my technique? Is learning this song, for example, actually improving my timing or my feel? Is the practice I'm doing actually giving me results? And if it's not, don't be afraid to change it. But once you've done a practice audit, what kind of changes might you make? Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into F's story and look at one practice routine change that we made that worked brilliantly. Have you ever done an absolute ton of practice, but when it really counted, like on a gig or on a jam session with friends, it felt like all of that practice didn't get you anywhere? Well, this is actually what F was going through. He told me his goal was to improve his feel when playing with drummers, so I asked him how he'd been practicing to try and achieve that. He told me he'd been playing a lot with a metronome, and whilst that's not necessarily a bad thing to do, it became clear that just practicing with a metronome wasn't going to help him achieve this goal. The reason being that if your goal is to get better at playing with drummers, then your practice needs to actually resemble and look like playing with drummers, and just playing with a metronome doesn't. So we made a shift. Whenever he played with a drummer in class, we would record it, even if it was just on a phone, so we could look back and see what was working and what wasn't. And if there was no drummer around, F would play along to a recording that had a great drummer on it, and then we would mute the recorded bass on the track, listen to F's bass in place of it, and then analyze what was working. And very suddenly, his timing, his feel, and his musical confidence completely went through the roof, because his practice now wasn't just reps, it was reps with a purpose. So what can you take from this? Make your practice at home resemble the real life goals you want to achieve. If you want to create your own bass lines to a song, then practice creating them, not just copying them from others. If you want to be more confident when you jam with friends or along to recordings at home, make sure your practice mimics that, even if it is just playing along and improvising to recordings at home. This is one of the biggest shifts I help my private students make, and it's often the difference between years of getting nowhere and finally getting results. And there's another reason why this works so well. In today's world of learning bass through YouTube, online courses, or with books, you often hear people talking about learning at your own pace. And when this is said, it's assumed that that means just slowing everything down. But one thing I've learned after years of teaching hundreds of bass players is that often learning at your own pace can mean going faster. The best students don't wait for permission to move on. If they're curious about something, whether that's a new technique, a new style, or a difficult bit of music theory, they just dive right in. They will challenge themselves before they feel 100% ready, because that challenge is what keeps them engaged. And if they're engaged, they will stay motivated, and that is when their progress really takes off. So if you are bored going over the basics again, or you're watching lessons that feel too slow, that isn't you being impatient, that's you being ready for the next step. So don't hold yourself back. But what should you do if you aren't feeling inspired to practice? Well, let's talk about that next. So this is something that Yannick Gwizdala actually taught me in a private lesson when I was about 18, and I found it so valuable that I've passed it on to pretty much every student I've ever had since. And what he taught me was, if you're not inspired to practice, it's okay to take a break. You're not being lazy, you're not making some big admission of defeat that says you're not cut out for this or you're not very talented. It's just a much simpler case of, if you want to make real progress, your head has really got to be in the game. So if you're not feeling inspired to practice, take a step back, and don't confuse that with taking a step down. Now, we've covered a hell of a lot of information in this video, and if you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed and like, where should I start with learning all of this stuff? Don't worry, that's completely normal. The truth is, becoming a great and confident bass player doesn't start with you trying to learn everything all together at once, because it's too much. The best place to start is actually by learning one skill that is really at the core of confident bass playing. I've made a video explaining exactly what that skill is, how it will help you play with more confidence, creativity, and much more control. So if you really are serious about getting better at the bass, click up here to watch that video next.